Nina Kwarteng looked at the clock on the cafe's wall and rubbed her tired eyes. It was 11:45 p.m. in Accra, Ghana, and she had spent the entire evening dashing between tables, taking orders, and clearing away dirty dishes. Her feet ached, and all she could think about was collapsing onto her small bed in the cramped apartment she shared with 2 other students. The warm glow of the overhead lamps felt comforting inside the cafe, but the moment she stepped out onto the street, she knew the city's night would envelope her in a quiet darkness. As she wiped the last table, her best friend and fellow student, Alma Mensa, approached. Alma was wearing the standard cafe uniform, a green polo shirt and black trousers, but her hair was tied in a neat bun, and she always seemed more put together than Nina felt. Alma had a concerned expression on her face, and Nina could practically feel the lecture coming. "Hi, Nina, you know how late it is?" Alma said, leaning in so that other coworkers wouldn't overhear. "I told you not to work these extra hours alone. You'll have to take a taxi or something. It's too late for the bus." Nina sighed and tucked a stray braid behind her ear. I know, she replied. "But I really needed the extra money. My tuition payment is due soon, and I can't risk losing my spot at the university." Alma's eyes softened. She understood Nina's struggle. Most of their classmates faced similar financial hurdles. "Okay," Alma said gently, "but at least promise me you'll be careful. These rideshare drivers, Bolt, Uber, all of them. You have to check the name and face before you get in. Make sure it matches. You remember those rumors about people disappearing in random cars at night?" Nina laughed, though it was a weak, forced sound. "You've been watching too many horror movies. I'll be fine, I promise. I'll double-check everything." She pulled out her phone and tapped open the Bolt app. Her phone battery was at 23%, which she hoped would be enough to last until she got home. Alma looked at Nina's screen and frowned. "Don't rely on that phone too much. Sometimes these apps glitch, and you can't be sure who's really picking you up," she warned. "Text me the moment you're in the car and again once you get home." "Understood." Nina nodded, grateful for Alma's concern. "I will," she reassured her friend, placing a hand on Alma's shoulder. "Thank you. You're the best." With that, Nina finished wiping the table, clocked out, and gathered her things. Stepping outside, she felt a momentary pang of unease. Accra's midnight streets were oddly quiet. Most of the local eateries and stores had long since closed, and the lampposts cast long, eerie shadows. The only sounds were distant traffic horns and the faint hum of a stray generator. Nina glanced at her phone again. The app showed her driver was just around the corner, a black Toyota Camry, plate number and driver name listed as David. "All right," Nina muttered to herself, "let's get this over with. I just need a safe ride home and some sleep." She glanced back at the cafe's entrance, where Alma was standing with arms folded, watching over her like a protective sister. Nina mustered a small smile, then turned to face the street. Her heart fluttered, just a bit, with the uneasy possibility that something might go wrong, though she told herself she was simply being paranoid. Nina stood under a flickering street lamp, scanning the quiet road for the telltale headlights of her promised ride. The air felt humid, and a light mist clung to the pavement, giving everything a hazy, dreamlike quality. As she checked the Bolt app one more time, she saw the digital representation of the car inching closer to her location. The driver's name, David K., was displayed next to a small, blurry photo that showed a middle-aged man with short hair. After waiting a few moments, she finally spotted a black Toyota Camry easing around the corner. It looked identical to the one in her app, same tinted windows, same license plate. The vehicle rolled to a smooth stop in front of her, the engine barely making a sound. Nina felt a small wave of relief. This was exactly what she had ordered. No shady surprises. But as she approached, the back window rolled down ever so slightly. A voice emerged from the darkness inside, low and calm. "Good evening, Nina. Get in." She froze momentarily, realizing she hadn't yet introduced herself. True, the app did show the passenger's name, but typically drivers asked, "Are you Nina?" or waited for you to confirm your identity. Something about the voice, soft but oddly resonant, made her nerves tingle. She peered through the window but couldn't see much of the driver's face. Only the faint outline of a pale cheek and possibly dark glasses. The rest of his features were cloaked in the dim interior. Clearing her throat, Nina stepped closer, trying to keep her voice steady. "You're David, right?" she asked, remembering to check. "Yes," came the reply. "David. Please, get in." Not wanting to appear rude, Nina opened the back door and slid onto the seat, placing her purse beside her. Before she could even buckle her seatbelt, the door locks clicked shut automatically, their mechanical clank echoing in the silent car. The driver didn't greet her or make any small talk beyond that initial acknowledgement. She found it odd. Most drivers at least attempted a friendly chat, especially at this hour. Nina's gaze flickered to the rearview mirror, hoping to catch a glimpse of his face, but the angle was all wrong. All she could see was the top of a head covered by a dark baseball cap and maybe a hint of black sunglasses. She couldn't be certain. A chill went through her, but she tried to shake it off. "Amma warned me to be careful," she thought. She decided to check everything just once more. Opening the Bold app, she looked at the profile picture of David K. The grainy image showed a man in his 40s, possibly heavier set, with a rounder face and short hair. Though the interior was dark, the man in the driver's seat seemed slimmer and more angular. Nina couldn't confirm anything for sure, but a creeping unease began to settle in. Maybe it's just a bad photo, she whispered to herself, deciding not to jump to conclusions. Yet the pit in her stomach remained, and as the car pulled away from the curb, she felt as though she were leaving behind not just the café, but the last vestige of normalcy for the night. Moments later, the Camry glided down the main road, streetlights passing in a rhythmic pattern through the windows. Typically, Nina would expect the driver to have a phone mount, music playing softly, or at least the standard glow of a digital rideshare app. Here, there was none of that. The driver's dashboard was eerily dark, with no radio display illuminated, no clock visible, and no LED from a phone stand. Just the faint red glow of the speedometer. Nina glanced around and noticed that the usual array of items, like a plastic air freshener swinging from the rearview mirror or a small beaded necklace, were missing. It was as if the inside of the car had been stripped of any personal touches. Everything appeared unnaturally pristine, yet somehow ancient, like it had been frozen in time. Even the seats felt stiff and cold under her touch. She tested her phone signal to reassure herself. Her bars were full, so she breathed a small sigh of relief. At least I can call someone if things get weird, she thought, but she resisted making any calls just yet. She didn't want to antagonize the driver or look paranoid. Despite her uneasy feelings, she tried to be rational. Then, out of habit, she decided to confirm the license plate from the inside. She tapped the window button to roll it down a crack. Strangely, the switch didn't respond. She tried the other window controls, still nothing. Glancing to the driver's seat, she debated whether to say something. Finally, she mustered the courage. Excuse me, David, would you mind if I roll down my window just a bit? It's quite warm in here." The driver did not respond. Instead, his hands remained firmly at the 10 and 2 position on the steering wheel, and he continued gazing forward, unblinking. Nina waited a few more seconds, hoping he might have just been lost in thought. "Hello?" she tried again, voice quivering slightly. "David?" Still, no reply. She frowned and leaned forward, noticing for the first time that his eyes, as far as she could tell, were hidden behind dark glasses. Who wears sunglasses at night? She wondered. Something felt deeply unnatural about the way he was holding his body. His shoulders never moved, nor did his head tilt. It was as though he were a statue, methodically guiding the car down the road in perfect silence. Nina's heart began to beat faster. This was well beyond awkward. It was downright eerie. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a message from Amma. "Are you okay?" "Home soon," Nina typed back as quickly as she could. "Something's off. Driver is weirdly silent. We'll let you know if safe." She hit send and stared at the screen, hoping for a quick reply, some solace. But no immediate response came. Nina resolved to keep calm. Perhaps the man was simply not a talker. Perhaps he was hard of hearing or had some personal quirk that made him wear sunglasses at night. She tried not to let her imagination run wild. The Camry glided on, and all the while, the city lights outside began to thin. Nina realized they were taking a route she didn't recognize. This definitely isn't the way to my apartment, she thought. Feeling a knot tighten in her stomach, she tried to rationalize again. Maybe he was avoiding traffic or following some backstreet route recommended by the app. But her instincts told her something else was happening, something she couldn't yet explain. After another few minutes, Nina's nerves were on edge. She watched as they passed deserted streets with shuttered shops and old, crumbling walls covered in faded advertisements. None of this terrain looked remotely familiar. She decided enough was enough. Leaning forward, she said in a louder, firmer tone, "Driver, I think you missed the turn to OSU. My place is near the university, and we're going the wrong way." The man offered no reply, no acknowledgement. His grip on the wheel remained unnervingly steady, and his posture unmoving. Anxiety roiled in Nina's gut. She hovered her finger over the phone's call button, prepared to dial the police or anyone, if the situation escalated. She glanced at the phone's rideshare map to confirm the route. To her dismay, the location marker showed the car traveling on a nameless road. The usual ETA, 15 minutes, message was missing, and in its place was a swirling loading symbol, as if the app were buffering or glitching. She tapped the screen repeatedly, but it refused to respond. Frustration and fear spiked in her chest. With trembling fingers, she pulled up Google Maps instead. The app also seemed stuck, refusing to pinpoint her location accurately. It was as if her phone's GPS had simply stopped working. A cold sweat gathered on her temples. Desperate, she raised her voice again. "Stop the car," she demanded. "I want to get out now. This is not the route I requested." For the first time since she'd entered, the driver reacted, though not in the way she'd hoped. The Camry's engine roared as he pressed down on the accelerator, propelling them faster into the darkened stretch of road. Nina's heart hammered against her ribcage as the streetlights became fewer and farther between, plunging them into patches of near total darkness. "Stop," she shouted, clenching her phone. She tried the door handle, but it was locked tight. She tugged repeatedly, but it wouldn't budge. No child lock indicator was visible, yet clearly the door was sealed. Panic flared in Nina's mind, overshadowing any sense of composure. Her phone vibrated again with a message from Alma. Nina read it quickly. "Nina? Hello? Are you all right?" She wanted to respond, but her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely type. Finally, she managed to send one word: help. Time seemed to slow as the car shot along the empty streets. Nina's mind raced, calculating her options. She would try calling Alma or the police, but she had to keep an eye on the driver to make sure he didn't stop her. Her phone beeped again, but this time it was the rideshare app itself, flickering onto the screen. It displayed a bizarre location with no recognized address, just random letters and numbers. She tapped the phone to see if she could read more details, but the screen glitched and flickered like an old television losing signal. Suddenly, a robotic voice from the app's interface spoke, though it was distorted and choppy. "Rirerero, route, unknown, no, exit, no, exit." Nina's blood ran cold. She had never heard the app do anything like that before. Then, with a final buzz, the phone's battery percentage dropped rapidly from 21% to 10%. In a matter of seconds, it had nosedived as though something was draining it. The phone began to overheat in her hand, and she let out a frightened yelp, dropping it momentarily. Trying to keep her cool, she forced herself to pick it back up and place it on the seat next to her. She looked up toward the driver. "Listen," she said, her voice trembling, "you need to pull over. Now. I don't know what's happening here, but I need to get out." The driver spoke again, softly, but there was something chilling in his tone. "You don't need to check your phone, Nina. I know exactly where I'm taking you." A wave of nausea hit her. He sounded as though he had known her for years. His calmness was far worse than if he'd yelled or threatened her. Nina tried to think. She had never given this man her name. The app might have shown it, sure, but the way he said it felt personal, almost intimate. For a moment, she tried to reason with him. David, if that's your real name, please, she pleaded, voice cracking. I have classes tomorrow. I'm tired. This is a mistake. She waited for a response, but he offered nothing but silence. The car pressed on, the speedometer needle hovering above the limit. Outside, the last faint glow of city lights disappeared, replaced by an unending stretch of road swallowed by the night. Minutes that felt like hours passed by. Nina frantically tried to open the door again, but it was sealed as if fused shut. She leaned closer to the window to see if she could smash it or signal for help, but there were no pedestrians, no other cars, nothing but darkness on either side. Her phone was losing battery fast, now at 6%, so she hastily unlocked it, intending to call Amma. To her dismay, the signal icon displayed no bars, as though they were in the middle of nowhere. She pressed the call button anyway, praying it would somehow connect. Silence on the other end. She tried the Ghana emergency number, but the call wouldn't go through. It was as if they had dropped off the grid entirely. Nina clutched the phone, her last lifeline, close to her chest, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. She cursed herself for ignoring Amma's warnings. She cursed her own desperation to get home quickly. Desperation sharpened her senses, and she examined the doors, windows, and seats more thoroughly. She noticed something truly unnerving. The window buttons were nothing but plastic shells. They weren't real switches that could open or close anything. They looked convincing at a glance, but on closer inspection, they were just molded plastic. Who would go to the trouble of creating fake window controls? Nina thought, terror creeping in. No matter how much she tried to remain logical, everything pointed to a horrifying conclusion. This driver was not some ordinary creep. This entire setup, the locked doors, the fake buttons, the glitching GPS, the silent, almost mechanical posture, suggested something beyond her understanding. She pounded on the driver's seat. Hey, driver, let me out. Do you hear me? Her voice cracked, straddling the edge of panic. Still, there was no reaction from him. She was trapped, and the claustrophobic sense of helplessness weighed on her like a heavy blanket. Suddenly, the driver whispered something, so quietly she almost missed it. Leaning forward, she caught the words, "You can't leave now." None of them ever left. Nina recoiled, dread crashing over her in waves. None of them ever left. She had a fleeting image of the many missing person flyers that occasionally popped up around campus, warnings of students who vanished, never to be seen again. She had always dismissed them as cautionary tales or tragedies far removed from her own life. But now it felt all too real. After what felt like an eternity of winding through unknown streets, the Camry slowed to a crawl. Nina pressed her face to the window, hoping to see some sign or building that would indicate they were still in Accra. Instead, she saw nothing. No houses, no people, no traffic lights. Just a long stretch of deserted road that seemed to fade into a dark horizon. Even the usual nighttime insects seemed absent. No chirping of crickets, no buzzing of mosquitoes. She glanced at the driver's GPS device mounted on the dashboard. The screen displayed a pitch-black background with large, blinking words, "No exit." Nina blinked in confusion, her breath catching in her throat. How could a GPS show no exit for a city road? This was impossible, she thought, heart thumping. As if sensing her confusion, the driver spoke again, this time more clearly, his voice tinged with something like triumph. She tried to jump, he said, voice echoing as though it came from far away. The last one. She thought it was better than letting me drive her all the way. Nina's skin prickled. Who are you talking about? She demanded, though every muscle in her body tensed as if bracing for a punch. Who tried to jump? The driver inhaled a ragged breath as if savoring the memory. A girl. So many nights ago. She was resourceful, tried to roll down the window, tried to break the glass. When that failed, She leaped from the passenger seat while the car was moving. Nina felt a wave of nausea. She tried to block out the gruesome mental picture. She had to find a way out, or she would end up like that girl, another missing person, another name whispered in terrified rumors. "Why are you doing this?" Nina asked, voice cracking with emotion. "What do you want from me?" But the driver didn't answer. The car picked up speed again, heading deeper into the void that lay before them. Nina could only look on, terror mounting, as the headlamps cut swathes through the pitch-black night, revealing a barren landscape devoid of life. Nina's eyes darted around the interior, searching for anything that might help her. She spotted the glove compartment on the passenger side, noticing it was slightly ajar. Something inside gleamed faintly under the meager light. She inhaled, building up her courage. If she could reach it, perhaps she could find a tool, a flashlight, a tire iron, or even a phone charger. Anything might offer a chance. She slowly unbuckled her seatbelt, mindful not to attract the driver's attention. Sliding across the seat, she leaned over the center console. The driver continued gazing forward, apparently unbothered by her movement. Nina reached out and gently tugged the glove compartment open. The inside contained a single object, a phone identical to hers in both model and color. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be a coincidence? She hesitated, picking it up carefully. The lock screen lit up, and to her horror, the background was a photo of her, a selfie she recognized from her own gallery. It was the very same photo she had taken a few months ago with Alma at the café. Her mind reeled in confusion. How did this phone end up here? She pressed the home button, and it opened without requiring a passcode. Swiping through the camera roll, she saw image after image of herself, studying in her dorm room, shopping with friends, walking along the university campus. Some of these photos she'd never seen before. They were taken from angles that implied she had been watched, followed. A sudden notification popped up, nearly causing her to drop the device in shock. "See you soon, Nina." She didn't recognize the sender's name. Panic threatened to consume her. It felt as though she had stumbled into some twisted dimension where her privacy had been invaded long before this ride even began. Did the driver know everything about her? Why was he collecting her photos? Breathing hard, she backed away, phone still in hand. She considered confronting him, but every instinct screamed not to. Instead, she tried to search the phone's contacts for any clue of who else might be behind this. The contact list was empty except for one entry labeled with a single letter, D. She pressed it, and the messaging thread opened. It was full of short lines. D. Tonight? Pick her up. D. 11:45 p.m. shift ends. D. She's alone. Nina clutched her mouth to stifle a gasp. Who was giving these instructions? If the driver was David, then who was D? Or was the driver receiving instructions from someone else? Fear coiled around her like a python, pressing tight. She heard a whisper from the front seat. "Close that compartment," the driver rasped. "It's not meant for you." Nina's hand scrambled to shut the glove compartment, heart pounding in her ears. She let the phone drop inside, as if releasing a hot coal. She sank back into her seat, trembling. Every breath felt like a laborious effort, and she could barely maintain her composure. The driver said nothing more, but she sensed he was fully aware of what she had just discovered. Hugging her arms around herself, Nina forced her gaze to the rearview mirror, hoping she could glean some piece of useful information about the driver. At first, she saw only the back of his cap. Then, in a moment that made her heart lurch, he tilted his head upward, revealing a partial glimpse of his face. It was only a second or two, but it felt eternal. The driver had pallid, waxy skin, and though he was wearing sunglasses, she could see two milky white eyes behind the lenses. It was as if his eyes lacked proper irises. He held that angle, and to Nina's shock, his reflection in the mirror shifted. She blinked, thinking it might be a trick of the poor lighting. But no, the reflection in the glass was different from reality. Where the driver's actual head was still, the reflection's lips were curling into a grin. Nina stifled a scream, pressing herself against the seat. But what made her blood truly run cold was the next instant. In the reflection, she appeared as well, but her mirrored image wore an expression of calm, almost blissful acceptance, completely at odds with her real face twisted in terror. It was like some malevolent force behind the mirror was mocking her. Her eyes were glued to the reflection, too frightened to look away. The smiling version of her opened its mouth in the mirror and whispered words she didn't fully hear, but felt. It sounded like, "Don't fight it." Nina jerked her head away, heart pounding so loudly she thought it might burst. The car soon approached a towering, unlit tunnel that yawned like a massive concrete maw in the middle of nowhere. The roadway leading inside was cracked and riddled with potholes, but the Camry navigated them smoothly. A sign above the entrance was barely legible under the car's headlights, but Nina managed to read the words, "Last stop." No turning back. The eerie chill in the air intensified as the Camry entered the tunnel. The temperature seemed to drop by several degrees, and Nina could see her breath clouding in front of her. The walls on either side were covered in graffiti she couldn't decipher, symbols, strange letters, maybe even names. She couldn't be sure, but she had the sense they were all connected to horrifying stories similar to hers. Suddenly, without warning, the driver performed a grotesque movement. His head twisted around 180 degrees, as though his neck were boneless. Nina's scream caught in her throat. His face was now turned directly toward her, even as the rest of his body faced the steering wheel. He smiled, an unnaturally wide grimace that revealed too many teeth. "Welcome," he said in a warped voice that seemed to echo off the tunnel walls. Nina's body froze in terror, and her rational mind struggled to process what she was seeing. This was beyond human, beyond any reality she'd ever known. It was a nightmare made flesh. The engine reverberated loudly, the sound bouncing around in the confined space, amplifying Nina's fear. She squeezed her eyes shut, certain that if she kept them open, she might lose her sanity from the sheer horror of it all. But darkness brought her no comfort. In fact, it only heightened the sense of dread. Emerging from the tunnel, the car slowed and the temperature seemed to normalize. Outside, a new landscape unfurled, a bleak, endless highway with neither beginning nor end in sight. There was no moon, yet the surroundings were lit by a faint, sourceless glow. Nina's gaze drifted to a seat pocket in front of her, where a corner of something peeped out, a small notebook. She mustered enough bravery to lean forward and slide it out. The cover was tattered, its edges frayed. Opening the first page, she saw a list of names, each scribbled in shaky handwriting. Some were crossed out, some were smudged beyond recognition. Pages in, she found the more recent entries. Anita, never found. Joseph, jumped. Alma? Nina? Nina's chest constricted. Alma was in this notebook. Could it be her friend, Alma Mensa? The same Alma who had warned her earlier that night? Confusion and alarm wrestled inside her. Alma had never mentioned being in a strange car like this. There was no reason for Nina to suspect she'd had a similar experience, unless Alma had kept it secret for fear no one would believe her. Tears pricked the corners of Nina's eyes. Had Alma been subjected to the same horror at some point? Had she escaped, or... The overwhelming questions collided in her mind, each one more terrifying than the last. Before Nina could process what the notebook truly meant, the phone in the glove compartment, which she had left there, lit up again with a piercing glow that cut through the darkness. A shrill notification sound followed, making her jump. The screen displayed a single text message in bold letters, "Jump now." Her mind raced. The only source for this message had to be that mysterious D. Did this cryptic voice want to help her escape, or was it luring her to another kind of doom? She weighed her options. The door had been locked tight, but maybe in a single, frantic moment, she could fling it open if it was temporarily unlocked. Glancing at the driver, she realized he was no longer turned around. His head faced forward again, still wearing that same eerie calm. Nina tested the door handle, expecting it to remain sealed. To her shock, it turned with a soft click, indicating it was open. Her heart thundered with hope, but that hope was short-lived. Almost instantly, the driver sensed her movement. With snake-like reflexes, he slammed his fist on the central lock. A harsh clunk reverberated through the car as the door locked again, shutting her in. Nina's breath caught in her throat as she watched him. His face twitched with anger or pleasure, she couldn't tell which, but it was the first genuine display of emotion he'd shown. Too late, he hissed, voice elongated as though echoing from a deep cavern. Nina's fingers remained on the handle, trembling. She was paralyzed by the realization that she had missed a fleeting window of opportunity. The Camry continued its journey along the lonely highway, flanked now by tall, dark shapes. At first, Nina thought they might be trees, but as she peered closer, she realized they were figures, still, silent figures standing alongside the road. Each figure wore black, and they seemed to be watching the car pass. Horror ignited inside her, for these silhouettes had no discernible faces, as though a haze masked their features. Then, amid the featureless shapes, Nina spotted one that looked unsettlingly familiar. It was a young woman, wearing something similar to Alma's favorite hoodie, the one with the café's logo on the front. Her face was more distinct than the others, wide, sorrowful eyes and parted lips as if about to speak. Alma. A choked sob escaped Nina's throat. How was Alma here? Her friend's eyes fixed on Nina, silently pleading. Nina mouthed words through the glass, but Alma didn't respond. The driver pressed on, ignoring her anguish. The road was lined with countless watchers, but only Alma's face stood out, painfully real. Cupping her hands around her mouth, Nina shouted, "Alma." The window muffled her cry, and the faceless watchers drifted behind them, disappearing into the gloom. Nina felt a deep pang in her chest, a grief that nearly consumed her. If Alma had truly been taken by this monstrous ride, was there any chance to save her? Amidst the swirling darkness of the endless road, Nina recalled a half-forgotten urban legend she had heard from classmates. It spoke of a 3 a.m. rule, in which any passenger still trapped in a mysterious ride by 3 a.m. would vanish forever. She had dismissed it as silly folklore until now. She glanced at the dashboard. To her surprise, a digital clock there read 2:58 a.m., its red numbers glowing ominously. The realization sank in. She had only 2 minutes to save herself, assuming the legend held any truth. Every second ticked by like a death knell. Adrenaline pumped through her veins. She wiped her tears away, forcing herself to focus. If there was any time to act, it was now. She observed the driver's posture, still eerily rigid. The doors were locked, but maybe she could unlock them manually if she was swift. She reached for the handle again, but it refused to budge. Fear hammered at her senses, threatening to overwhelm her. 2:59 a.m. The digits glowed, mocking her. Nina's mind whirled. Her seatbelt was still on, and she fumbled to unbuckle it with sweaty fingers, hearing the distinct click as it came free. She tried rolling down the window again, but the fake plastic controls did nothing. She had to open the door or force it. The driver let out a low chuckle that reverberated in the car. "You're running out of time," he intoned, and Nina's blood chilled. The lock was sealed, but maybe brute force could help. She placed both feet against the door, bracing herself against the driver's seat, and pushed with all her might. With a surge of desperate strength, Nina kicked at the door repeatedly. She felt the metal yield slightly under her fierce blows, but it still held. The driver turned his head, that grotesque, unnatural movement, grinning from ear to ear. His features looked like they were melting, flesh dripping away to reveal something dark beneath. The digital clock on the dashboard blinked 3 a.m. for a split second. In that exact moment, Nina gave one final, adrenaline-fueled kick. The door latch snapped. The door swung open into the rushing darkness. Air rushed inside, cold and punishing. Nina didn't think, she just acted. She jumped, hurling herself out of the car, arms protecting her head as she tumbled onto the asphalt. The impact rattled her bones, and she rolled painfully onto the roadside, scraping her arms and knees. The roar of the Camry's engine receded, and the world spun. Bruised and winded, Nina sprawled on the ground, coughing and trying to gather her bearings. She expected to see headlights bearing down on her if the driver turned around, but the road was silent and empty. No black car, no sign of pursuit. Just the stark hush of an uninhabited stretch of highway. Shivering, she looked at her phone. The screen was cracked but still faintly lit. It now read 3:01 a.m. Nina felt a surge of relief mixed with dread. She had escaped, but was the horror truly over? Some time later, she wasn't sure how long Nina regained full consciousness. She was lying at the edge of a dusty road, her clothes dirty and torn. The sky above was lightening to a pre-dawn hue, as if the entire nightmare had only spanned a few hours. She got to her feet unsteadily, pain radiating through her limbs. Glancing back at the spot where she'd landed, she saw no skid marks, no debris from the car, nothing indicating it had ever been there. It was as though she had stepped into an alternate reality and then stepped out, leaving no trace behind. In the distance, she could see the faint outline of a small convenience store, its neon lights flickering. Summoning her last reserves of energy, she limped toward it. An old security guard stood outside, half dozing. He perked up as he saw her approach, looking concerned. "Sister, are you all right?" he asked, hurrying to steady her. "You look like you've been in an accident." Nina opened her mouth to explain, but the words got tangled in her throat. What could she say? That a phantom driver in a black Camry had kidnapped her and driven her through a nightmare road. She shook her head. "I need to use a phone," she rasped. "My battery's almost dead." The guard nodded sympathetically and led her inside. Nina noticed her phone's rideshare apps were missing: Bolt, Uber, all gone. Only her call function and a few other apps remained. Confusion mixed with a flicker of dread, but she pushed it aside for now. She had bigger problems, like confirming she was still in the real world. With trembling hands, Nina dialed Amma's number, only to be met with a recorded message telling her the number did not exist. She tried again, carefully entering each digit. The same result. Her heart sank, cold and heavy. Amma's phone had always worked, and Nina was sure she had the correct number. Alarmed, she attempted a quick search on social media, expecting to find Amma's profile. It was gone. Nina's throat tightened. There was no sign of Amma Mensah anywhere, as if her friend had been erased from existence. Had the black car, the driver, and that entire supernatural ordeal somehow consumed Amma's identity? Or was Nina losing her mind? She stumbled to a nearby plastic chair and sat down, fresh tears burning her eyes. The guard offered her water, his concerned gaze unwavering. She tried to compose herself. "I need to call the police," she said finally. "I need to report something." The guard helped her find the local police station number, and soon she was on the line. As she described her terrifying experience, the officer sounded skeptical but promised to send someone to check on her. Nina could hear the doubt in his voice, but she had no energy left to argue. She just needed someone to believe her. When she hung up, she felt more alone than ever. Not only had her night turned into a waking nightmare, but now it seemed as though her best friend had been wiped from reality. Could that notebook entry be right? Had Amma been a previous passenger? Was that the reason she disappeared? Nina's mind churned with questions. Just then, her phone buzzed, a single, unexpected vibration in her trembling hand. Nina nearly dropped it, her nerves still on edge. She looked down and saw, to her horror, a new rideshare notification that simply read, "Your ride is here." She stared at the screen, her heart pounding so hard it made her dizzy. How could a rideshare notification pop up when she no longer even had the Bolt or Uber apps installed? Her mind reeled. It was impossible, but there it was, blinking at her in quiet menace. A creeping dread seized her. Slowly, she turned her head to look out the convenience store's glass door. Parked just a few yards away, barely visible in the early morning light, was the black Toyota Camry. It sat there like a predatory beast waiting for its prey, engine idling softly. Tears welled up as she felt the suffocating sense of déjà vu. Didn't she escape this horror? Hadn't she forced the door open and hurled herself onto the pavement to break free? How was the car here, and more importantly, why? The security guard followed her gaze and frowned. "Is that someone you know?" he asked. Nina couldn't speak, too paralyzed by the sight. She noticed, with mounting terror, that the driver's seat seemed empty, but the headlights were on. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from an unknown number. "One passenger must always remain. You escaped, but your friend didn't." Nina's mind flashed back to the driver's cryptic statements and the macabre references to previous passengers. This message suggested a terrible truth. In order for Nina to leave, someone else had to take her place, Amma. Perhaps that was why Amma had vanished from every database, every contact list. She had become the new passenger, trapped in the driver's clutches, or something far worse. A shadow flickered behind her in the convenience store's dim interior. She turned sharply to find a reflection in the glass of the store's fridge doors. Amma stood there, but not the Amma she knew. Her hair hung limply, and her eyes were black, devoid of any whites or irises. Nina yelped, scrambling backward and nearly knocking over a rack of potato chips. When she looked again, Amma was gone, as if she'd been nothing but a hallucination. The guard rushed over. "What's happening?" he asked, alarmed by Nina's shriek. She stammered, I saw someone. My friend. But she's gone." He followed her gaze, but saw no one. Alarmed by her panic, he tried to soothe her, but she pulled away, tears coursing down her cheeks. Nina's phone lit up once more with a new message. "Look in the mirror, Nina." Her eyes darted around, finally settling on a small rectangular mirror behind the store's counter, used by the cashier to keep an eye on customers in the aisles. With trembling steps, Nina approached it. Her reflection stared back, eyes filled with dread, face pale. Then, behind her reflection, another figure materialized, Amma, the same black-eyed apparition. Nina spun around, but there was no one there. She whipped her head back to the mirror, and Amma's reflection stared at her, mouth open in a silent scream. Nina could do nothing but watch, heart pounding against her ribcage. In that moment, her phone rang, jolting her from the terrifying vision. The screen read, "Unknown caller." Nina's first instinct was to ignore it, but some compulsion made her answer. "Hello?" she whispered, voice shaking. A soft static crackled on the other end, followed by the same distorted voice she recognized from the driver. "It's your turn to drive." She steadied herself against the store's counter, nearly dropping the phone. "I'm not driving anything," she spat, a surge of defiance rising in her. But her anger wavered when she noticed something on the counter, car keys. They were the same style as the ones she had glimpsed on the driver's ring earlier in the night. No one else was near them, and the store's cashier was nowhere in sight. The keys seemed to materialize out of thin air. Nina felt her hands shake as she reached for them, compelled by a force she couldn't explain. With each step she took, the black Camry outside revved its engine, as though calling to her. She tried to resist. She tried to remind herself of the horrors she had endured. But something about the entire chain of events felt inescapable. The words from the text, "One passenger must always remain," echoed in her mind. If she didn't take the driver's seat, if she didn't become the next caretaker of this unholy vehicle, would she be snatched back into it as a prisoner? Tears burned in her eyes as she realized the choice she might have to make. She fumbled with the keys, her breath ragged and shallow. Stepping outside, she saw the Camry's door open, as if inviting her. The old security guard was preoccupied with a radio call, oblivious to what Nina was about to do. Her phone vibrated one last time. The final text, "There's no escape from what's meant to be. Take your seat, Nina." With trembling legs, Nina approached the driver's door. She hesitated for a heartbeat, remembering Amma's face, the horrific illusions, the bizarre realm of no exit. But the voice in her mind whispered that it was the only way to spare herself from eternal pursuit. She had escaped once, but fate had circled back. The dreadful possibility lingered that if she refused, someone else she loved might be taken, just as Amma had been. Nina slid behind the wheel, and the car's engine purred in a sinister greeting. The moment she placed her hands on the steering wheel, the doors locked. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes shone with an otherworldly glow, flickering for just an instant before returning to normal. She felt the seat beneath her envelop her in cold familiarity. As the sun's first-week rays broke over the horizon, Nina stared at the empty passenger seat, realization dawning like a weight on her soul. She knew, in the deepest part of her mind, that from now on, she wasn't just Nina Kwarteng anymore. She was the caretaker of a cursed ride, destined to roam the streets and claim its next passenger whenever night fell. In the hush of dawn, the black Camry pulled away from the convenience store, leaving the guard scratching his head in confusion. The car disappeared down the lonely road, and the city of Accra, still yawning awake, remained entirely unaware that another chapter of this endless nightmare had just begun. The end.